Stephen Harrison's life was once the epitome of the American dream. Born into a modest family, he demonstrated an entrepreneurial spirit from an early age. As a teenager, he mowed lawns and delivered newspapers, meticulously saving every penny. His parents, proud of their son's ambition, encouraged him to pursue his dreams. By the time he reached college, Stephen had already launched a small tech company from his garage. Harrison Tech Technologies quickly gained momentum, his knack for spotting market gaps and crafting innovative solutions, pushing him ahead of the curve. He dedicated himself entirely to the business, often working until the early hours to perfect his creations. By 25, Stephen had become a millionaire, achieving everything a young man could dream of: wealth, success, and the envy of his peers. His rise was meteoric. His name featured in business magazines, hailed as one of the brightest minds of his generation. His products revolutionized the tech industry, earning him both accolades and a loyal following. As his company expanded, he hired a talented team, taking Harrison Technologies to even greater heights. Yet despite his demanding career, Stephen still managed to attend high-profile parties and charity events, mingling with the elite. It was at one of these events that Stephen met Janelia, a striking woman whose beauty and magnetic presence captivated everyone around her. She was everything Stephen had ever wanted: intelligent, stunning, and seemingly supportive of his ambitions. They began dating, and Stephen, overwhelmed by infatuation, showered her with lavish gifts, expensive vacations, and every luxury money could buy. To him, Janelia was the perfect companion, the missing piece that completed his success. However, Stephen failed to see the cracks beneath her surface. Janelia, behind her charming smile and glamorous exterior, was nothing like she appeared to be. Driven by an insatiable greed for wealth, she was a master of manipulation, using her beauty to lure rich men like Stephen into her web. To her, he was simply another conquest, another rung on the ladder to a more luxurious life. While Stephen poured everything into their relationship, Janelia's true intentions remained hidden. She knew how to play the role of the loving partner, always saying the right things and being present when he needed her most. But all the while, she was biding her time, waiting for the moment when something or someone better came along. Stephen, blinded by love, never suspected a thing, and the relationship, seemingly perfect, was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. As the years went on, Stephen's business began to falter. The tech industry grew more competitive, and several of his ventures failed to meet expectations. Bad investments and market fluctuations hit Harrison Technologies hard, and for the first time, Stephen faced financial instability. The pressure to save his company took a severe toll on him, both mentally and physically. During this challenging time, he turned to Janelia, believing that their love could withstand anything. He needed her now more than ever. But Janelia, ever cold and calculating, began to show her true nature. She grew distant, irritable, and resentful of their diminishing lifestyle. The lavish dinners and exotic vacations were no longer a part of their routine, and Janelia despised the change. During this difficult period, as the weight of his financial struggles bore down on him, Stephen tried to reach out to Janelia for comfort. But instead of support, he was met with a cold indifference, a stark contrast to the woman he thought he knew. Janelia began to change. She became distant, impatient. The things she once admired about him, the ambition, the drive, became irritants. She complained about their diminishing lifestyle, about what was slipping through her fingers. The expensive dinners were no longer as frequent, the lavish trips less extravagant. As the tension between them grew, Stephen began to realize that the woman he had once adored had never truly cared for him. And by the time the truth finally dawned on him, it was far too late. After an exhausting day at work, Stephen returned home to find Janelia packing her bags. The sight sent a cold shiver through him, and panic quickly set in. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that she was leaving him. He begged her to stay, his voice desperate as he pleaded for her to understand that this was just a temporary setback. He promised that things would get better, that he would rebuild everything he had lost and provide for her once again. But Janelia was unmoved, her eyes cold and distant. She told him, with brutal indifference, that she had no intention of staying with a man who could no longer maintain the lavish lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. Her words were a blade that sliced through him, leaving him reeling in disbelief. How could the woman he had loved, the one he had sacrificed everything for, abandoned him when he needed her most. In a fit of desperation and anger, Stephen accused her of being nothing more than a gold digger, demanding she return the money he had spent on her. The argument spiraled out of control, both of them hurling accusations, insults, and recriminations at each other. Janelia, her rage rising to a fever pitch, vowed that he would regret this. She stormed out of the house, leaving Stephen in a state of shock and utter despair. Little did he know her parting words were not a hollow threat, but the beginning of a nightmare that would tear his life apart. Days later, Stephen's world collapsed. The police arrived at his doorstep, arresting him on charges of rape. Janelia had accused him of forcing himself on her during their argument, claiming that he had refused to accept her rejection. Stephen was struck dumb, unable to comprehend what was happening. He protested his innocence, his mind spinning as the officers took him away, but the evidence was damning. Janelia had meticulously crafted her revenge. She had recorded their heated argument, selectively editing the footage to paint him as a violent, abusive predator. Her lawyer, a ruthless and calculating individual, presented a compelling case that convinced the court of Stephen's guilt. Despite his frantic attempts to defend himself, Stephen had no tangible proof to counter the accusations. The trial became a media circus, with sensational headlines and lurid details splashed across every tabloid. Stephen's reputation was destroyed in the blink of an eye, and his once thriving business crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Former friends, colleagues, and associates distanced themselves from him, unwilling to be associated with an accused rapist. Alone and abandoned, Stephen was left to face the harsh reality of a 20-year prison sentence. Prison was a living hell for him. Every day was a struggle, consumed by the anger and bitterness that gnawed at him. His mind was a prison of its own, constantly replaying the events that led to his downfall. The man who had once been a symbol of success and ambition was now just another inmate, forgotten by the world outside. The brutality of prison life wore away at his spirit, each day a test of his will to survive. But even in the darkness, Stephen refused to give up. He spent countless hours in the prison library, studying law and meticulously planning his revenge. He knew that one day when the time was right, he would make them all pay. Stephen knew that Janelia had ruined his life, and the knowledge twisted inside him like a blade. The years in prison had carved away the man he used to be, leaving behind something colder, something relentless. He had nothing left, except the need to make her pay. 20 years passed, and when the prison gates finally opened, Stephen was a different man. Hardened, quiet, his eyes held a weight that had not been there before. He had spent every moment behind bars fueling the fire of his vengeance, and now, finally, he was free to act. For 5 years, he disappeared into the shadows. He worked as a mechanic, using his hands to rebuild cars while he rebuilt his plan. He lived frugally, hoarding every penny, never drawing attention to himself. The lavish life he had once known was a distant memory, a sacrifice he gladly made for the greater goal. He watched Janelia from afar. She had moved on, married a man named Liam. They lived in a pristine suburban home, safe behind the illusion of comfort. Stephen saw through it. He knew her. He knew that greed still rotted her from the inside. And then, he made his move. It was late when he broke into their home. The night swallowed his footsteps, the security system silenced by careful hands. He drugged their drinks, watching from the darkness as they fell unconscious. Their breaths slowed, their bodies stilled. With precision, he staged the crime. He used their phones to create the illusion of betrayal, of a marriage crumbling under the weight of secrets. The knife was cold in his hand as he approached Liam. Stephen hesitated, but only for a moment. This was justice. This was balance. With whispered apologies, he buried the blade into the sleeping man's chest. Blood pooled around him, the house now silent in a way that could never be undone. Stephen placed the knife in Janelia's hand, arranging the scene with meticulous detail. When she woke, she would find herself trapped, her life shattered just as she had once shattered his. No escape, no mercy. By the time the police arrived, Stephen was gone, a ghost in the wind. He used his savings to vanish, creating a new life in a place where no one knew his name. Janelia, left to the mercy of a justice system she had once manipulated, realized too late that Stephen had returned the favor. Just as he had pleaded for the truth to be seen all those years ago, she screamed her innocence into the void. No one listened. Stephen had won. But as he sat in a foreign land, staring at a world that no longer felt like his, he wondered if he had truly escaped, or if Janelia's ghost would haunt him just as she had once haunted his dreams. Stephen Harrison lived with an ever-present sense of dread, always on the move, never staying in one place long enough for anyone to truly see him. His identity was a carefully constructed lie, a shield to protect him from detection, and he had mastered the art of evading capture. But despite the meticulous planning, the revenge he had long desired left him with nothing but an empty satisfaction. The man he once was had disappeared, erased by the shadows of his actions, and in his place stood a hollow version of himself. When he fled the country, Stephen thought he had left behind not just his past, but the consequences of his revenge. But the ghosts of his former life followed him, creeping into the quiet moments of his new existence, reminding him that no matter where he went, he couldn't escape the aftermath of his choices. Back in the States, Janelia's life crumbled. As she was escorted from her suburban home, the shock on her face was unmistakable. What had once been a sanctuary of comfort and privilege had transformed into a scene of horror. Her neighbors, who had admired the facade of her perfect life, were left reeling in disbelief as the brutal reality set in. Janelia was accused of murdering her husband Liam, and the evidence against her was damning. The media swarmed, eager to witness the fall of the woman who had once enjoyed a life of luxury. In court, her lawyer struggled in vain to dismantle the prosecution's case. Texts, fingerprints, a staged crime scene, all pointed to her guilt. Janelia insisted she had been framed, claiming Stephen had a motive for revenge, but her story was dismissed as the desperate cries of a woman trying to escape the web she had woven. The jury wasted no time in convicting her, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Meanwhile, Stephen, under the alias Daniel Roberts, had tried to rebuild his life far from the reach of American law. In a small foreign town, he worked as a mechanic, keeping to himself in an effort to remain unnoticed. His new life was a quiet one, marked by isolation and an avoidance of anything resembling connection. He was a shadow of the man he once was, someone consumed by the weight of his actions. The images of Liam's lifeless body and the sound of Janelia's frantic screams echoed in his mind, haunting him in the stillness of his solitude. The revenge he had long sought had come at a terrible price. The satisfaction he'd anticipated had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming emptiness and regret. Despite his attempts to bury his past, it festered beneath the surface, gnawing at his conscience. His guilt ate away at him, leaving him withdrawn and cold, distant from those who once might have offered him solace. As the years passed, Stephen's existence became a testament to the futility of vengeance. His efforts to outrun his past only deepened his sense of isolation. His life, once marked by the drive for retribution, had become a quiet prison of his own making. In the end, Stephen and Janelia were both casualties of their own choices. Stephen's thirst for revenge had transformed him into the very monster he sought to destroy. Janelia's greed and deceit had condemned her, leaving her to face the consequences of the injustice she had once inflicted on him. Their story was a tragic reminder of the destructive nature of lies, the heavy toll of vengeance, and the irreversible damage that comes from chasing retribution without considering the price.